Happy holidays and welcome to this special edition of As You Like It, the official podcast of Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival. I'm your host, Jason King Jones, Artistic Director here at Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival. And for today's episode, we're going to be doing something a little different. As the holiday season is a time for traditions, many of us love to spend some time this season to re-encounter Charles Dickens' classic, A Christmas Carol. Now for some, it's a favorite movie version. Mine happens to be the one where Stadler and Waldorf sing Marley and Marley, while others, it may be participating in a local stage production that often includes songs, dances, and plenty of children. And what you may not know is Charles Dickens himself was well known for delivering live recitations of his novella, creating the original live performance of A Christmas Carol in 1853, about 10 years after his story was first published, and he performed those readings for 16 years. Now what's more, the New York Public Library holds the only prompt copy that Dickens used during these public readings, and the digital collections of the New York Public Library has made images of this copy publicly available. So, for today's episode of As You Like It, I'll be reading A Christmas Carol from Dickens' own prompt book. And I'll be taking some of Dickens' suggested edits as well. So, grab a cup of your favorite holiday cheer, cozy up by the fire, and enjoy this reading of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. A Christmas Carol, a ghost story of Christmas by Charles Dickens. Stave 1. Marley was dead, to begin with. There was no doubt about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his mind to. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead? Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, and his sole friend and his sole mourner. And even Scrooge wasn't so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business. On the very day of the funeral, he solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point that I started. There was no doubt that Marley was dead. Now, this must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. If it were not perfectly conceived that Hamlet's father died before the play began, there would be nothing more remarkable in his taking a stroll at night in an easterly wind upon his own ramparts. Then there would be no other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's Cathedral, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name, yet there it stood, years after, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, was Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, and no cold could chill him. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with a handsome look, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggar employed him to stow a trifle. No children asked him what was o'clock. No man nor woman ever in all his life inquired a way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and would wag their tails, as though they would to say, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? That was the thing he liked. to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, but foggy withal. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already, and the fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole. And the door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep an eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so much very smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk, putting on his white comforter, and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation Scrooge had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "Christmas a humbug, Uncle? Well, you don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Out upon Christmas! What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not a year richer? A time for balancing your books and having every one of them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you? If I had my will, every idiot that goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips would be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. Uncle, nephew, keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it? But you don't keep it." "Well, let me have it alone then. Much good it may do you, much good it has ever done you." "But there are many things from which I might have derived good, which I have not profited, I dare say," said the nephew, "Christmas being among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time, when it has come round, apart from the veneration due it to the sacred origin of anything belonging to it, can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem to only consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow travelers to the grave, not another race of creatures bound on some other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good, and it will do me good, and I say God bless it." The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible to the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. "Let me hear another sound from you," said Scrooge, "and you'll be getting your Christmas by losing your situation." "You're quite a powerful speaker, sir," he said, turning to his nephew. "I wonder you don't go into Parliament." "Oh, don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow." Now, Scrooge said he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said he would see him in that extremity first. "Oh, but why?" said Scrooge's nephew. "Why?" "Why did you get married?" said Scrooge. "Because I fell in love." "Because you fell in love. Ha! Good afternoon." "Nay, Uncle, but you never come to see me before that happened. Why give it at the reason for not coming now?" "Good afternoon." "I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?" "Good afternoon." "I am sorry, with all my heart, to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I've been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle." "Good afternoon." "And a Happy New Year." "Good afternoon." His nephew left the room without an angry word notwithstanding. The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and they bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley, I believe, said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead for 7 years, Scrooge replied. He died 7 years ago this very night. We have no doubt his liberality is well presented by his surviving partner, said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. And it certainly was, for they had been two kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned, shook his head, and handed the credentials back. At this restive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, taking up his pen, it is more than usually desired that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at this present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, Are there no prisons? Asked Scrooge. Plenty of prisons. And the union workhouses, are they still in operation? Oh, yes, they are. Oh, I'm afraid from what you said that something had occurred to stop them from their useful course. I'm glad to hear it. Under the impression that they are scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body, the multitude, a few of us, are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for? Nothing. Oh, you wish to be anonymous. I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help support the workhouses, and they cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Well, many can't go there, and then many would rather die. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that. But you might know it. It's not my business. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with others. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue the point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened. A young nose, mumbled by the hungry cold as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay. Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy, and the singer fled, leaving the keyhole in the fog and even more congealed frost. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool, tacitly admitted the fact to the expected clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed the candle out and put on his hat. You'll want the whole day tomorrow, I suppose. If it's quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'd be bound. Yes, sir. And yet, you don't think me ill-used when I pay you a day's wages for no work. It's only once a year, sir. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning. The clerk promised he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed, and in a twinkling the clerk, with his long ends of his white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no great coat, went down a slide at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honor of it being Christmas Eve, and then ran home as hard as he could pelt to play at Blind Man's Bluff. Scrooge took up his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms, a building up the yard, old enough now and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being let out as offices. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door of his house, except that it was very large. Also, that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also, that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him than any man in the city of London. Let it also be borne into mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner this afternoon. Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without it undergoing any immediate progress of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face, with a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but it looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up upon its ghostly forehead. This man had curiously stilted as if by breath or hot air, as though the eyes were wide open. They were perfectly motionless. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key, as he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on, so he said, "Pah!" and he closed the door with a bang. The sound resounded throughout the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellar below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes, so he fastened the door, walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly, too, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was all right. Now, he had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, chamber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nothing under the sofa, small fire in the grate, spoon at the basin ready, and the little saucepan of gruel upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. An old fire guard, old shoes, twin fish baskets, washing stand on 3 legs, and a poker. Well, quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus, secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very low fire indeed, nothing on such a bitter night. As he threw back his head in the chair, his glance happened to rest upon a bell. A disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment, and with a strange, inexplicable dread, that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. Soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. Now, this might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bell ceased as they had begun together, and they were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound. Then he heard the noise, much louder, on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, and then coming straight towards his door. It came through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it had cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost." The same face, the very same Marley, in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots, tassels on the ledger bristling like his pigtails, and his coat skirts and hair upon his head. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it even now, though he looked at the phantom through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of his death-cold eyes and the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about his head and chin, he was still incredulous. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much," Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." Who were you, then? You're particular for a shade." "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." "Can you sit down?" "I can." "Then do it." Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, but the ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe in me?" "No, I don't." "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "I don't know. A little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You might be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." Scrooge was not so much in the habit of cackling jokes, nor did he feel it in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his horror. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage around his head as if it were too warm to wear indoors, his lower jaw dropped down upon his breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and hands before his face. "Mercy," he said, "dreadful apparition, why do you come to trouble me?" "Man of the worldly mind, do you believe in me or no?" I do. I must. But why do spirits walk upon the earth? Why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man that the spirits within him should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide, and if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death." "You are fettered," Scrooge trembled. "Tell me why." "I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I gird it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full and heavy, and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago, you have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain. Scrooge glanced about him on the floor, in the expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50, 60 fathoms of iron chain, but he could see no such thing. Jacob, old Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob. I have none to give, the ghost replied. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by these ministers to other kinds of men. I tell you all I would. A very little more is permitted to me. I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in my life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob, Scrooge observed in a businesslike manner, though with humility and deference. Slow? The ghost replied. 7 years dead, mused Scrooge, and traveling all that time? The whole time. No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse. Oh, you travel fast on the wings of the wind. You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years. Oh, do you not know that ages of incessant labor by immortal creatures for this earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed? Not to know that any Christian spirit, working kindly in this little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that a space of regret can make amends for one's life opportunities missed. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob. Business! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop in the water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. At this time of the rolling year, I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raised them to the blessed star which led to the wise man to his poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conduced me? Now Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going at this rate, beginning to quake exceedingly. Hear me. My time is nearly gone. I will. Pray, don't be hard on me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray. How is it that I appear before you in a shape that you can see? I may not tell. I have sat invisible beside you many, many a day. That was not an agreeable idea. Scrooge shivered and wiped the perspiration from his brow. It is no light part of my penance. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of procuring Ebenezer. You are always a good friend to me. Thank you. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? It is. I think I'd rather not. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow night when the bell tolls 1. Couldn't I take them all at once and have done over with, Jacob? Expect the second on the next night with the same hour, the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us." And when he had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table, bound round his head as before. And Scrooge knew this by the small sound that the teeth made when the jaws were brought back together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again and found his supernatural visitor confronting him with an erect attitude with his chain wound about its arms. And the apparition walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. And when they were in 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held out his hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped. Scrooge became sensible of the confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation, wailings of inexpressible sorrow, self-accusatory. The spectre, after listening for a moment, joined in the mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Scrooge followed to the window and looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He had been quite familiar with one old ghost with a monstrous iron safe attached to his ankle, who cried piteously at being unable to assess the wretched woman with an infant whom he saw below upon the doorstep. The misery with them all was, clearly, that they sought to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever. Scrooge closed the window, examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, as he had locked it with his own hands, and the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable. And, being from the emotion he had undergone, or the fatigue of the day, or the glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed, without undressing, and fell asleep on the instant. Stave 2, the first of the 3 spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. "Why, it isn't possible that I have slept the whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything happened to the sun, that it is 12 noon. Scrooge went to bed again and thought and thought and thought it over and over and over and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavored not to think, the more he thought. The ghost bothered him exceedingly every time he resolved within himself. After mature inquiry that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again like a strong spring released to its first position and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? He lay in this state until the chime had gone 3/4 more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and, considering that he could go no more to sleep than could go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. At length, ding dong, 1/4 past. Scrooge counting. Ding dong, 1/2 past. Ding dong, 1/4 to it. Ding dong, the hour itself. And then the bell sounded with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of the bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand. not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into the half-remembered attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair was hung about its neck, and down its back was white as if with age, yet the face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strange thing about it, the strangest thing was, that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. "Are you the spirit, sir, which the coming was foretold to me?" "I am." What are you?" "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" "No, your past." Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and begged him to be covered. "What?" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? It is not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and force me through the whole train of years to wear it low upon my brow." Now Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend, or in knowledge of having wilfully bonneted the spirit of any period of his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him. "Your welfare. Rise and walk with me." It would have been vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted for pedestrian purposes, that bed was warm and that the thermometer a long way below freezing, that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gowns, and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at that time. The grasp, though gentle as the woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made toward the window, clasped his robe in supplication. "I am mortal and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either side. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day with snow upon the ground. "Good heaven!" said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about. "I was bred in this place. I was a mere boy here." The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling. "Your lips are trembling," said the ghost. And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered, with an unusual catching in his voice, that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. "You recollect the way," said the ghost. "Remember it? I could walk it blindfold. Strange to have forgotten it for so many years." They walked along the road. Scrooge, recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance. Some shaggy ponies now were trotting towards them with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in the country, All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were full of merry music. These are but the shadows of the things that have been. They have no consciousness of us. Now, the jocund travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named every one of them. Why, he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them. Why did his cold eyes glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why, he was filled with a gladness that when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at the crossroads and byways for their several homes. What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas! What good had it ever done him? The school is not nearly deserted, said the ghost. One solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left still there. Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. They left by the high road, by the well-remembered lane, and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick, a large house, but one of broken fortunes. In they went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them, and disclosed a long, bare room, made barer still by a line of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he had used to be. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. Suddenly a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt and leading an ass laden with wood by the bridle. "Why, it's Ali Baba!" Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. "It's dear old Ali Baba. Yes, I know him. One Christmas time, when yonder solitary child was left here all alone, he did come for the first time just like that. Poor boy. And Valentine. Oh, his wild brother Orson. There they go. And what's his name? Oh, it was put down with his drawers asleep at the gate of Damascus. Don't you see him? And the Sultan's groom turned upside down by the genie. There he is upon his head. Serve him right. I'm glad of it. What business had he to be married to the princess?" To hear Scrooge expending all the earnestness of his nature on such subjects, in most extraordinary voice, between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened and exciting face, would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city, indeed. Then, with a rapidity of transition very foreign to his usual character, he said, in pity for his former self, "Poor boy. I wish... Oh, it is too late now." "What's the matter?" Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully, waved its hand, saying as it did, "Let us see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead. But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. The only thing he knew was that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so, that there he was alone again when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down, despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost and saw with a mournful shaking of his head. The door now opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in and putting her arms out and kissing him, addressing him, "Dear, dear brother, I have come to bring you home." And the child clapping her tiny little hands and bending down to laugh, "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little Fan?" returned the boy. "Yes, home for good and all. Father is so much kinder than he used to be. That home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night that when I was going to bed, I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should. He sent me in a coach to bring you, and you're to be a man and never to come back here. But first, we are to be together all Christmas long and have the merriest time in the world. You're quite a little woman, Fan, exclaimed the boy, and she clapped her hands and laughed and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again and stood on tiptoe and embraced him. Then she began to drag him in her childish eagerness toward the door, and he, nothing loath to go, accompanied her. A terrible voice in the hall cried, "Bring down Master Scrooge's box there!" And in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared down on Master Scrooge with a ferocious condescension, and threw him into a dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him. Then he conveyed him and his sister into the veriest old well of a shivering parlor that he had ever seen, where the maps upon the wall and the celestial and terrestrial globes on the windows were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curiously light wine and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administered installments of these dainties to the young people, at the same time sending out a meager servant to offer a glass of something to the post boy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, but if it was the same tap that he had tasted before, he had rather not. Master Scrooge's trunk being by this time tied on top of the old chaise, the children bade the schoolmaster goodbye right willingly, and getting into it, drove gaily down the garden sweep. Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered, said the ghost. But she had a large heart. So she did, cried Scrooge. You're right. She died a woman, said the ghost. And had, I think, children. One child. True, your nephew. Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered, yes. Although they had but a moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of a real city were. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that were there too. It was Christmas time again. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Knew it? Oh, I was apprenticed here. And they went in. At sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried with great excitement, Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig! Alive again! Old Fezziwig laid down his pen, looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself from his shoes to the organ of benevolence, and called out in comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, Ho there, Ebenezer, Dick. Scrooge's former self, a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. Dear Dick Wilkins, to be sure, said Scrooge to the ghost. Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Oh, poor Dick. Oh, dear Dick. Yo-ho, my boys, said Fezziwig. No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. And you wouldn't believe how these two fellows went at it. They charged into the street with the shutters. 1, 2, 3, had them in their places. 4, 5, 6, barred and pinned them. 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have got to 12, panting like racehorses. Hilly-ho! Cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from his high desk with a wonderful agility. Clear the way, my lads. Let's have lots of room here. Clear the way. There was nothing they would have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off as it was dismissed from public life for evermore. The floors were swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped in the fire, and the warehouse was snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would ever desire to see on a winter's night. In came a fiddler with his music book and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it and tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile. In came 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came the boy from over the way who was suspected of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from next door, but one who was proved that had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another, comes some slyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couple at once, hands down, half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping, old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couple starting off again as soon as they got there, all top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter especially provided for that purpose. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies, and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and the boiled, when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to the dance with Mrs. Fezziwig, top couple too, and a great good stiff piece of work cut out for them, 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance and had no notion of walking. But if they had been twice as many, if 4 times, old Fezziwig would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. A positive light appeared to issue from the Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would become of them next. And when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dances, advance and retire, your partner, bow, curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place, Fezziwig cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired, but the 2 apprentices, they did the same to them. And thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under the counter in the back shop. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small?" echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the 2 apprentices who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig. "Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter self. "It isn't that, spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and to count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost him a fortune." Well, he felt the spirit's glance and stopped. "What is the matter?" Nothing particular. Something, I think." "No. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all. My time grows short, observed the spirit. Quick. This was not addressed to Scrooge, nor to any one whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect, for again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in his eye, which showed the passion that had not taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, whose eyes there were tears. It matters little, she said softly. To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has displaced you? A golden one. This is the even-handed dealing of the world, said young Scrooge. There's nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth. You fear the world too much. All your hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of its sordid reproach. I have seen your noble aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, has engrossed you. Have I not? What then? Even if I have grown much more wiser, what then? I'm not changed toward you. She shook her head. Am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until in good season we could improve our worldly fortunes by your patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man. I was a boy. Your own feelings tell you that you were not what you are. I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly have I thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it, and I release you. Have I ever sought release? In words, no, never. In what then? In a changed nature, an altered spirit, in another atmosphere of life, another hope as its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us, tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? No. He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition in spite of himself. But he said, with a struggle, You think not? I would gladly think otherwise if I could. Heaven knows when I have learned a truth like this. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, even as I believe that you would choose a dowerless girl, or choosing her, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do. And I release you with a full heart and for the love of him you once were. He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed. You may, the memory of it past half make me hope you will, have pain in this. A very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly as an unprofitable dream from which it happened well that you awoke. May you be happy in the life you have chosen. And she left him. They parted. Spirit, said Scrooge, show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me? One shadow more, exclaimed the ghost. No more, no more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more. But the restless ghost pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene and place, a room not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, not like the last one. Scrooge believed that it was the same until he saw her, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise of this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge, in his agitated state of mind, could count, and unlike the celebrated herd of the poem, they were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting itself like 40. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and the daughter laughed heartily, enjoyed it very much, and the latter soon began to mingle in the sports, got pillaged by the young brigands most ruthlessly. What would I not have given to be one of them, though I never could be so rude? No, no, I wouldn't for the wealth of all the world have crashed that braided hair or torn it in two for the precious little shoe. I wouldn't have plucked it off, God bless my soul, to save my life. As to measuring her waist in sport as they did, bold young brood, I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have expected my arm to have grown round it for a punishment and never come straight again, and yet I should have dearly liked, I own, to have touched her lips, to have questioned her, that I might have opened them, to have looked upon the lashes of her downcast eyes and never raised a blush, to have let loose those waves of her hair, an inch which would have keepsake beyond a price. In short, I should have liked, I do confess, to have had the lightest license of a child and yet be man enough to know its value. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she, the laughing face and the plundering dress, was borne down with the center of a boisterous group, just in time to greet a father who came home attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Then the struggling, the shouting, the onslaught was made on the defenseless porter, the sealing time with chairs for ladders to dive into his pockets, despoil him of brown paper parcels, hold on tight by his cravat, hug him round the neck, pommel his back, and kick his legs in irrepressible affection. The shouts of wonder and delight with the development of every package was received, and terrible announcement of the baby that had been taken in the act of putting a doll's frying pan into his mouth was more than once suspected of having swallowed a fictitious turkey glued on his wooden platter. The immense relief of finding this false alarm, the joy and gratitude of ecstasy, they were all indecipherable alike. It is enough by degree that the children and their emotions got out of the parlor and by the stair at a time up to the top of the stairs, and they went to bed and so subsided. And now Scrooge looked more attentively than ever, when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside, and when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and been as springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed. "Belle," said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, "I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon." "Oh, who was it?" "Guess." "How can I? I don't know." And then she added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed, "Mr. Scrooge." Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window. As it was not shut up, he had a candle inside and could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat alone, quite alone in the world, I do believe. Spirit, remove me from this place. I told you, these were shadows of things that had been. That they are what they are, do not blame me. Remove me! I cannot bear it! He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which, in some strange way, there were fragments of all of the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. Leave me! Take me back! Haunt me no longer! And in the struggle, that can all be called a struggle in which the ghost, with no visible resistance of his own, was undisturbed by any effort of the adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him, he seized upon the extinguisher cap and by a sudden action pressed it down upon his head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form. But though Scrooge pressed it down with all its force, He could not hide the light which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the cap a parting squeeze in which his hand relaxed, and had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. Stave 3, the second of the three spirits. Awakening in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore, and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was once again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness for this especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new spectre would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hand, and lying down again, established a sharp lookout all round the bed. Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing. Consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time, he lay upon his bed, the very core and center, a blaze of ruddy light which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant or would be. It was sometimes apprehensive that it might be at the very moment an interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having the consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think as you or I would have thought at first, for it is always the person, not the predicament, who knows what ought to have been done in it, and would have unquestionably would have done it too. At last, I say, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room. Now, this idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was back on the lock, a strange voice called him by his name and bade him enter. He obeyed. Scrooge was in his own bedroom. There was no doubt about that. But it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back from the light as if so many mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of the hearth had never known in Scrooge's lifetime, or Marley's, or for many, many a winter season gone. Heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and great bowls of punch. In every state upon this couch lay a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in the shape not unlike Plenty's horn, who raised it high to shed its light on Scrooge as he came, peeping round the corner door. Come in, and know me better, man." Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though his eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. "I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me." Well, Scrooge reverently did. It was clothed in one simple, deep green robe or mantle, bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded off or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set there with shimmering icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face and its sparkling eyes upon its head, its cheery voice and unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. "You have never seen the likes of me before," exclaimed the spirit. "Never? Have you never walked forth with the younger members of my family? Meaning, for I am very young, my elder brother is born in these later years." "I don't think I have," said Scrooge. "I'm afraid not." Have you had many brothers, spirit?" "More than 1,800, said the ghost. Tremendous family to provide for." The ghost of Christmas present rose. "Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. And tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it." "Touch my robe." No, the Scrooge did as he was told, and held it fast. And they stood in the city streets on a Christmas morning, where, for the weather was severe, the people made a rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music, in scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings, and from the tops of their houses, where it was mad delight to see the boys to come in, plumping down into the road below, and splitting into artificial snowstorms. The house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs, and with the dirtier snow upon the ground. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended into the shower of sooty atoms, as if the chimneys in Great Britain had by one consent caught fire and were blazing away in their dreadful heart's content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate of the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavored to diffuse in vain. For the people were shoveling away on the housetops, with jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now then exchanging a facetious snowball, better-natured missile far than many a wordy jest, laughing heartily as if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling into the street with their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions, shining in the fatness of their growth like Spanish friars, and winking from their shelves at the girls as they went by, and glancing demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in shopkeepers' benevolence to dangle from the copious hooks that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods and pleasant shufflings ankle-deep through the withered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squab and swarthy, setting off in the yellow and orange lemons, and in the great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a stagnant-blooded race, appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round their little world in slow and passionless excitement. Soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they all came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes with their gayest faces, and at the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings innumerable people, carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers of the bearers, passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch, and it was a very uncommon kind of torch. For once or twice, there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled with each other. He shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humor was restored directly. For they said it was a shame to quarrel on Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was. In time the bells ceased, and the bakers were shut up, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth of all these dinners and the progress of their cooking in the thawed blotch of wet above each baker's oven, where the pavement smoked as if the stones were cooking too. "Is there a peculiar flavor in what you sprinkle from your torch?" said Scrooge. "There is, I own." "Would it apply to any dinner on this day?" "To any kindly given. To a poor one most." "Why to a poor one most?" "Because it needs it most." "Spirit," said Scrooge after a moment's thought, "I wonder if you, of all beings in the many worlds about you, should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment." "Aye," cried the spirit. "You would deprive them of their means of dining every seventh day, often the only day in which they can be said to dine at all," said Scrooge, "wouldn't you?" "Aye," cried the spirit. "You seek to close these places on the seventh day, and it comes to the same thing." "I seek," exclaimed the spirit. "Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family," said Scrooge. "There are some upon this earth of yours," returned the spirit, "who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us and all their kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us." Scrooge promised that he would. They were on, invisible as they had been before, into the suburbs of the town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost that, notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself in any place with ease, and that he stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully as like a supernatural creature, or as possible he could have done in any lofty hall. And perhaps it was the pleasure of the good spirit, and in showering off his power, or else it was his own kind, generous nature, and his sympathy with all the poor men, that led him straight to Scrooge's clerk, for there he went. And he took Scrooge with him, holding to his robe, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled, and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Think of that. Bob had but 15 bob a week. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas present blessed his 4-roomed house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out in but poorly and twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for 6 pence. And she hid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, getting the corners of their monstrous shirt collar, Bob's private property conferred upon his son and heir in honor of the day, into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linens in the fashionable parks. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelled the goose and know it for their own, and basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onions. These young Cratchits danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud, although his collars nearly choked him, blew the fire until the slow potatoes bubbling up knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. Why, what has ever got your precious father then? Said Mrs. Cratchit. And your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha wasn't as late last Christmas by half an hour. Hey, here's Martha now, Mother, said the girl, appearing as she spoke. Here's Martha, Mother, cried two young Cratchits. Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha! Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are, said Mrs. Cratchit, kissing her a dozen times and taking off her shawl and bonnet with an officious zeal. We had a deal of work to finish up last night, replied the girl. We had to clear away this morning, Mother. Well, never mind so long as you are come. Sit down by the fire, my dear. Have a warm, Lord bless you. No, Father's coming, cried the two young Cratchits, who were everywhere all at once. Hide, Martha, hide! So Martha hid herself, and in came little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas, for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. Why, where's our Martha? Cried Bob Cratchit, looking around. Not coming, said Mrs. Cratchit. Not coming, said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits, for he had been Tim's blood horse all the way from church and had come home rampant. Not coming on Christmas Day? Now, Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, even if it were only a joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the two young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash-house that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. How did little Tim behave? Asked Mrs. Cratchit, when she had rallied Bob on to his credulity, and Bob hugged his daughter to his heart's content. Ah, as good as gold, said Bob. And better. Somehow he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much. He thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, how he hoped that people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, that he might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. And Bob's voice was tremulous when he told them this. Trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crutch was heard upon the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire. And while Bob, turning up his cuffs, as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons and stirred it round and put it on the hob to simmer. Master Peter, with the two ubiquitous young Cratchits, went to fetch the goose, which they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought the goose was the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon to which a black swan was a master of course, and in truth it was something very like that in this house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted off the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny little corner of the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight rose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There was never such a goose. Bob said that he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavor size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by the applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone on the dish, well, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet, every one had had enough. And the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break the turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall in the backyard and stolen it while we were merry with the goose, a supposition to which the young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hello, a great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like a washing day. Oh, that was the cloth. A smell like an eating house that a pastry's cook next door to each other with the laundress next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck on the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding! Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now that the weight was off her mind, she would have confessed that she had had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought that it was at all a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last, the dinner was done. The cloth was cleaned, the hearth swept, the fire made up, the compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect. Apples and oranges were put out to the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half of one. And Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done. And Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us." With all the family re-echoed, "God bless us." "God bless us, everyone," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side, upon his little stool, and Bob held his withered little hand, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with an interest that he had never felt before, "tell me if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat," replied the ghost, "in a poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by fortune, the child will die." "No, no, oh no, kind spirit, say he will be spared." "If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here." "What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. "Man," said the ghost, "if you be man at heart, Forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live and what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor child. Oh, God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust. Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes upon the ground. But he raised them speedily on hearing his own name. Mr. Scrooge, said Bob, I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. The founder of the feast, indeed, Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. I wish I had him here. I'd like to give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and hope he'd have a good appetite for it. My dear, said Bob, the children. Christmas Day. It should be Christmas Day, I am sure, she said, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow. My dear, said Bob mildly, Christmas Day. I'll drink to his health for your sake. And the day's, said Mrs. Cratchit, not for his. Long life to him, a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. He'll be very, very happy, I have no doubt. Now the children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heart in it. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, and he didn't care tuppence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which did not dispel for a full 5 minutes. After it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before from the mere relief of Scrooge the baleful being done with. Bob Cratchit told them how he had a situation in his eye from Master Peter, which would bring him in, if obtained, full 5 and 6 pence weekly. The two young Cratchits laughed tremendously at the idea, being a man of business. Peter himself looked thoughtfully at the fire from between his collars, as if he were deliberating what particular investment he should favor when he came into the receipt of that bewildering income. Martha, who was a poor apprentice at the milliner's, then told them what kind of work she had to do and how many hours she worked at a stretch, and how she meant to lie abed tomorrow morning for a good long rest, tomorrow being a holiday she passed at home. Also, how she had seen a countess and a lord some days before, and how the lord was much about as tall as Peter, at which Peter pulled up his collar so high that you couldn't have seen his head if it had been there. All this time, the chestnuts and the jug went round, and by and by they had a song about a lost child traveling in the snow from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice, and sang it very well indeed. There was nothing of high marks in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not at all well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty. And Peter might have known, and very like did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, and pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded, and looked happiest yet in the bright sprinkling of the spirit's need for parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. By this time it was getting dark and snowing heavily, and Scrooge and the spirit were along the streets. The brightness of the roaring fire in kitchens, parlors, and the sorts of rooms were wonderful. Here the flickering of the blaze, showering preparations for a cozy dinner with hot plates baking through and through before the fire, deep red curtains ready to be drawn to shut the cold out in the darkness. There, all the children of the house were running into the snow to meet their married sisters, brothers, cousins, aunts, uncles, and all the first to greet them. Here again were shadows on the window blind, gusts assembling, and there a group of handsome girls, all hooded and fur-booted, and all chattering at once, tripped lightly off to some near neighbor's house, where, on a single man who saw them enter, artful witches, well they knew it, in a glow. And now, without a word, from the ghost they stood upon a bleak and desert moor, where the monstrous masses of rude stones were cast about as though it were a burial place of giants, where water spread itself wheresoever it listed or should have done but for the frost that held it prisoner, where nothing grew but moss and furze and coarse, rank grass. Down in the west, the setting sun had left a streak of fiery red, which glared upon the desolation for an instant like a sullen eye, and frowning lower, lower, lower yet, was lost in the thick gloom of the darkest night. "What place is this?" said Scrooge. "A place where miners live, who labor in the bowels of the earth," returned the spirit. "But they know me. See." A light shone from the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced towards it. Passing through a wall of mud and stone, they found a cheerful company assembled around a glowing fire. An old, old man and woman, with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The old man, in a voice that seldom rose above the howling of the wind upon the barren waste, was singing them a Christmas song. The spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge hold his robe, and passing on above the moor, sped out to sea. To Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of the land, a frightful range of rocks behind them, and his ears were deafening by the thundering of water as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreadful caverns it had worn, and fiercely tried to undermine the earth. But in a dismal reef of sunken rocks, some league or so from the shore, on which the waters chafed and dashed the wild winds through the years, there stood a solitary lighthouse. Great heaps of seaweed clung to its base, and storm birds, born of the wind, one might suppose, as seaweed and the water rose about it like the waves they skimmed. But even here, two men who watched the light had made a fire, and through the loophole in the thick stone wall shed out a ray of brightness on the awful sea. Joining their thorny hands over the rough table at which they sat, they wished each other Merry Christmas in their can of grog, and one of them, the elder one, with his face all damaged and scarred by hard weather, as the figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was like a gale in the earth. Again, the ghost sped on, above the black and heaving sea, on, until, being far away, as Scrooge told them, from any shore, they lighted on a ship. They stood beside the helmsman at the wheel, and look out in the bow, the officers who had the watch, dark, ghostly figures in their several stations, but every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke to the companionship of some bygone Christmas day, with homeward hopes belonging to it. And every man on board, waking or sleeping, good or bad, had had a kinder word for another day on that day than on any day in the year, and had shared to some extent in the festivities, and had remembered those he cared for at a distance, and had known that they delighted to remember him. It was a great surprise to Scrooge, and as this scene vanished, he heard a hearty laugh. And it was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's than to find himself on a bright day in a dry, gleaming room with the spirit standing, smiling by his side, and looking at that same nephew with approving affability. Scrooge's nephew laughed. If you should have happened, if by any unlucky chance, to know a man more blessed in laugh than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is, I should like to know him. Introduce me to him. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things that, while there is an infection in disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresolutibly contagious as laughter and good humor. And when Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, holding his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face in the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's niece, by marriage, laughed as heartily as he, and their assembled friends, being not a bit behindhand, roared out lustily. He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live, cried Scrooge's nephew. He believed it too. More shame for him, Fred, said Scrooge's niece indignantly. Bless those women. They never do anything by halves. They are always in earnest. She was very pretty, exceedingly pretty. Dimpled, surprised-looking capital face, a ripe little mouth that seemed to be made to be kissed, and no doubt it was. All kinds of good little dots about her chin that melted into one another when she laughed, and the sunniest pair of eyes you ever saw in any little creature's head. Altogether, she was what you would have called provoking, but satisfactory too. Oh, perfectly satisfactory. He's a comical old fellow, said Scrooge's nephew. That's the truth, and not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him. I'm sure he's very rich, Fred. At least you always tell me so. Huh. What of that, my dear, said Scrooge's nephew. His wealth is of no use to him. He doesn't do any good with it. He don't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking that he is ever going to benefit us with it. I have no patience with him, observed Scrooge's niece. Scrooge's niece's sister and all the other ladies expressed the same opinion. Oh, I have, said Scrooge's nephew. I'm sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. Here, he takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? He doesn't lose much of a dinner. Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner, interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody else said the same, and they must be allowed to have been competent judges because they had just had dinner and, with the dessert upon the table, were clustered round the fire by lamplight. Well, I am glad to hear it, said Scrooge's nephew, because I haven't any great faith in these young housekeepers. What say you, Topper? Topper clearly had his eye on one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, for he answered that a bachelor was a wretched outcast who had no right to express an opinion on the subject, whereat Scrooge's niece's sister, the plump one with the lace tucker, not the one with the roses, blushed. Do go on, Fred, said Scrooge's niece, clapping her hands. He never finished what he begins to say. He's such a ridiculous fellow. Scrooge's nephew reveled in another laugh, and it was impossible to keep the affections off, though the plump sister tried hard to do so with the aromatic vinegar. His example was unanimously followed. I was only going to say, said Scrooge's nephew, that the consequences of his taking a dislike to us and not making merry with us is, as I think, that he loses some pleasant moments, which could do him no harm. I am sure he loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts, either in his moldy old office or his dusty chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him. If he finds me going there in good temper year after year and saying, Uncle Scrooge, how are you? If it only puts him in the vein to leave his poor clerk £50, that's something. I think I shook him yesterday. Well, it was then their turn to laugh at the notion of his shaking Scrooge. But being thoroughly good-natured and not caring much what they laughed at, so long as they laughed at any rate, he encouraged them in their merriment. After tea, they had some music, for they were a musical family, and they knew what they were about when they sung a glee or a catch, I can assure you, especially Topper, who could growl away at the bass like a good one and never swell the large veins in his forehead or get red in the face over it. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music, and after a while, they played at forfeits, for it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child himself. There was a first game at Blind Man's Buff. Of course there was. And I no more believe Topper was really blind than I believe he had eyes in his boots. My opinion is that it was a done thing between him and Scrooge's nephew, and that the ghost of Christmas Present knew it. The way he went after that plump sister and the lace tucker was an outrage to the credulity of human nature, knocking down irons, tumbling over the chairs, bumping up against the piano, smothering himself among the curtains. Wherever she was, there he went. He always knew where the plump sister was. He wouldn't catch anybody else. And if you had fallen upon him, as some of them did, and stood there, he would have made a feint of endeavoring to seize you, which would have been an affront to your understanding, and would have instantly sidled off in the direction of the plump sister. Here's a new game. It's called Yes and No. Now, Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answering their questions yes and no as the case was. Now, the fire was questioning of which he was exposed, elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal. A live animal, a rather disagreeable animal, savage animal, an animal that growled and grunted sometimes, and talked sometimes, and lived in London, and walked the streets, and wasn't made a show of, and wasn't led by anybody, and didn't live in a menagerie, and was never killed in the market, and was not a horse, or an ass, or a cow, or a bull, or a tiger, or a dog, or a pig, or a cat, or a bear. At every new question put to him, this nephew burst out a fresh roar of laughter, and was so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up to the sofa and stamp. At last, the plump sister cried, "I have found out! I know who it is, Fred! I know who it is!" "What is it?" "It's your Uncle Scrooge!" Which it certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, though some objected that the reply to "Is it a bear?" ought to have been, "Yes. He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure," said Fred, "and it would be ungrateful not to drink to his health. Here's a glass of mulled wine ready in our hand at the moment to say, Uncle Scrooge. Well, Uncle Scrooge." Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay, light of heart, that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return and thanked them in an audible speech if the ghost had given him time. But the whole scene passed off in a breath, and the spirit and he were again upon their travels, much as they saw, and as far as they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands, and they were close at home. By struggling men, and they were patient in their great hope. By poverty, and it was rich. In almshouse, hospital, jail, in misery, every refuge, where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out, he left his blessing, and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it were only a night. But Scrooge had his doubts about this, because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into the space of time they passed together. It was strange, too. While Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change but never spoke it, until at last they left a children's 12th night party, when looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that his hair was gray. "Are spirits' lives so short?" asked Scrooge. "My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight." "Tonight?" "Tonight at midnight. Hark! The time is drawing near." And the chimes were ringing 3/4 past the hour of 11 at the moment. "Forgive me if I am not justified in what I asked," said Scrooge, looking intently at the spirit's robes, "but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?" "It might be a claw, for the flesh there is upon it. Look here." And from the folding of its robes, it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at his feet and clung upon the outside of the garment. "Oh, man, look here, look down there," exclaimed the ghost. There were a boy and a girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate, too, in their humility, where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints. A stale and shriveled hand like that of age had, pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade, though all the mysteries of wonderful creation had monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having them shown to him this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves, rather to be parties in a lie of such enormous magnitude. Spirit, are they yours? They are man's, said the spirit, looking down upon him, and they cling to me, appealing from mankind. This boy is ignorance, this girl want. Beware them both, and all their degree, but most of all beware this boy. For on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it, cried the spirit, stretching out its hand toward the city. Slander those who tell it ye. Admit it for your factious purposes, and make it worse, and bide the end. Have they no refuge or resource? Cried Scrooge. Are there no prisons? Asked the spirit, turning on him with his own words. Are there no workhouses? The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. Stave 4, the last of the spirits. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which the spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of the visible save one outstretched hand. Scrooge felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with his hand. You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened but will happen in the time before us. Is that so, spirit? The upper portions of the garment, which contracted for an instant in the folds as if the spirit had inclined its head, that was the only answer Scrooge received. And although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, and observing his condition, gave him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes fixed upon him. And while he thought he stretched out his own to the utmost, he could see nothing but a spectral hand and one heap of black. A ghost of the future, I fear you more than any spirit I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear your company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me? It gave no reply. The hand pointed straight before them. Lead on, the night is waning, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit. And they scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them, but there they were in the heart of it, a change almost, among the merchants. And the spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "No," said a great man in a monstrous chin. "I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead." "When did he die?" inquired another. "Well, last night, I believe." "Why, what was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die." "God knows," said the first. "Well, what has he done with his money?" "I haven't heard. Company, perhaps. But he hasn't left it to me, that's all I know." "Well, I don't mind going if a lunch is provided, but I must be fed if I'm going to make one." And another laughed. "Well, goodbye." "Goodbye." "Goodbye." The speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the men and looked toward the spirit for an explanation. The phantom glided on into the street, its finger pointing to two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, thinking the explanations might lie here. He knew these men also perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy and great importance. He made a point of always standing well in their esteem, in a business point of view, that is, strictly in a business point of view. "How are you?" "How are you?" "Well, old Scratch has got it now, at least they." "So I am told." "Cold, isn't it?" Seasonable for Christmas time." "You're not a skater, I suppose?" "No, no. Something else to think of." "Good morning." And not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial, but feeling assured it must have been for some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. Could scarcely be supposed to be bearing on the death of old Jacob, his partner, for that was past, and this ghost province was the future. However, he looked about in this very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to the usual time for his being there, he saw no likeness of him among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. Well, it gave him little surprise, however, for he had been revolving in his mind a change of life, and hoped he saw his newborn resolutions carried out in this. Quiet and dark, beside him stood the phantom, with its outstretched arm. When he roused himself from his thoughtful quest, he fancied from the turn of the hand and its situation in reference to himself, that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder and feel very cold. They left this busy scene and went into an obscure part of town, where the ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half naked, drunk and slipshod and ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offences of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime and filth and misery. Here, iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. Upon the floor within there piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, hinges, files, weights, and refuse iron of all kinds. Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and hidden in mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat, and sepulchres of bones. Sitting among the wares he dealt in by a charcoal stove made of old bricks was a gray-haired rascal of great age. Scrooge and the phantom came into the presence of this man just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shops. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black. Now, after a short period of blank astonishment in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into laughter. "There's the charwoman alone to be the first," cried the one who had entered first. "Let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance if we haven't all three met here without meaning it. You haven't met in a better place. You were made free of it long ago, you know, and the other two aren't strangers. Come into the parlor, come into the parlor." Well, the parlor was a space behind a screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with his old stair rod, and having trimmed the smoky lamp, for it was night, With the stem of his pipe, he put it to his mouth again, and while he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle onto the floor and sat down in the flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on the knees, and looked with a bold defiance at the other two. "What are the odds, then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber?" said the woman. "Every person here has a right to take care of themselves. He always did." "True enough, indeed," said the laundress. "No man more so." "Well, why don't you stand there, staring as if you was afraid? Woman, who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose." "No, indeed. We shouldn't hope not." "Very well, then. That's enough. Who's the worse for a loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose." "No, no, not indeed," said Mrs. Dilber, laughing. "If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, wicked old screw, why wouldn't he be natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have somebody else to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying, gasping out his last there alone by himself." "It's the truest word that ever was spoke," said Miss Dilber. "It's a judgment to him." "I wish it was a heavier judgment, and he should have been, you may depend on it, if I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me see what the value of it is. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, and I'm not afraid to have him see it. Open the bundle, old Joe." But the gallantry of his friends would not allow this, and the man in faded black, mounting the breach first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severely examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums, as he was disposed to, give each upon the wall, and added them up into a total and found that they were nothing more to come. "That's your account," said Joe. "I wouldn't give another sixpence if it was to be boiled, not for that. What's next?" Oh, Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apron, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. "Always give too much to the ladies. That's a weakness of mine. That's the way I ruin myself," said old Joe. "That's your account. If you asked me for another penny and made it open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off a half a crown." "And now, you do my bundle, Joe," said the old woman. Oh, Joe went down to his knees for greater convenience of opening the bundle. He dragged out a large, heavy roll of some dark stuff. "Well, what do you call this?" said Joe. "Bed curtains?" "Hi!" returned the woman. "Bed curtains! You don't mean you took 'em down, rings and all, with him lying there?" "Yes, I do." "Why not?" "You were born to make your fortune," said Joe, "and you'll certainly do it." "I certainly shall. I shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching into it, for the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe," returned the old woman coolly. "Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now." "His blankets? Who else do you think? He wasn't likely to take cold without 'em, I dare." "Well, I hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh?" said the old Joe, stopping his work and looking up. "Don't be afraid of that. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about for such a thing if he did. You may look to the shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one, too. Why, they'd have wasted it on him if it hadn't been for me." "What do you call wasting of it?" said Joe. "Putting it on him to be buried in it, to be sure," replied the woman. "Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calicoing ain't good enough for such a purpose, and it's good enough for anything. It's quite as becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one." Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. "Spirit, I see the case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?" He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed, of which beneath a ragged sheet there lay something covering up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced round it in obedience to the simple, secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light rising in the outer air fell straight upon this bed, and on it, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. He lay in the dark, empty house, with not a man, woman, or child to say he was kind, or in this memory, one kind word to be with him. That a cat was tearing at the door, and there was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in the room of death, and why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge dare not think. Spirit, this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson, trust me. Let us go. Still the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head. I understand you, Scrooge returned, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power. Again, it seemed to look upon him. If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, said Scrooge, show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you. The spirit spread its dark robe before him for a moment like a wing, and withdrawing it, revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone, and with an anxious eagerness. At length, the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight, of which he felt ashamed, which he struggled to repress. He sat down to the dinner that had been hoarding for him by the fire, and when she asked him, faintly, what news, which was not until after a long silence, he appeared embarrassed how to answer. Is it good or bad? She said, to help him. Bad, he answered. We are quite ruined? No, there is hope yet, Caroline. But if he relents, she said, amazed, there is. Nothing is past hope if such a miserable thing has happened. He is past relenting, said the husband. He is dead. She was a mild and patient creature if her face spoke truth, but she was thankful in her soul to hear it. And she said so with clapped hands. She prayed forgiveness the next moment and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. To whom will our debt be transferred? I don't know. But before that time, we shall be ready with the money, even though we were not. It would be bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creditor and his successor. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline. Yes, their hearts were lighter. The children's faces, hushed and clustered round to hear what they were so little understood, were brighter, and it was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him, caused by the event, was one of pleasure. Let me see some tenderness connected with the death, said Scrooge, for this dark chamber spirit which we just left now will be forever present to me. The ghost conducted him through several streets, familiar to his feet. As they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling which he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and the daughters were engaged in needlework, but surely they were very quiet. And he took the child and set him in the midst of them. Where had Scrooge heard these words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out, and he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go in? The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand on her face. Oh, the color hurts my eyes, she said. The color? Oh, poor Tiny Tim. They're better now again, said Cratchit's wife. It makes them weak by this candlelight. I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time. Past it, rather, Peter answered, shutting up his book. but I think he has walked a little slower than he used to these last evenings, Mother." They were very quiet again. At last, she said, and in a steady, cheerful voice that only faltered once, "I have known him walk with I have always known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed." "And so have I," cried Peter, "often." "And so have I," exclaimed Mother. So it all. But he was very light to carry, and Father loved him so that it was no trouble, no trouble. And there's your father at the door." And she hurried out to meet him, and little Bob, in his comforter, he had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they had tried to help him to the most. Then the two young Cratchits got up on their knees and laid each little child's cheek against his face, and they said, "Don't mind it, Father. Don't be grieved." Bob was cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. "Sunday? Huh. You went today then, Robert?" said his wife. "Yes, my dear," returned Bob. "I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is, but you'll see it often. I promised him I would walk there on Sunday. My little child. But my little child." He broke down at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been farther apart perhaps than they were. He left the room, went upstairs into the room above, where it was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. And there was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the child's face. He was reconciled to what had happened and went down again, quite happy. They drew around the fire and talked, the girls and the mother working still. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom had scarcely seen him but once, but who, meeting him on the street that day and seeing he looked just a little down, said Bob, inquired what happened to distress him. "On which," said Bob, "for he is the pleasantest spokest gentleman you have ever heard, I told him, 'I'm heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit,' he said, 'and heartily sorry for your good wife.' By the by, how he ever knew, I don't know." "He knew what, my dear?" "Why, that you were a good wife," replied Bob. "Well, everybody knows that," said Peter. "Very well observed, my boy," cried Bob. "I'm heartily sorry," he said, for your good wife. If I can be of service for you in any way." And he gave me his card. "But that's where I live. Pray come now." "Now, it wasn't," cried Bob, "for the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for any kind way, but this was quite delightful. He seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim and felt with us." "I'm sure he's a good soul," said Mrs. Cratchit. "You would be sure of it, my dear," returned Bob, "if you saw him and spoke to him. I shouldn't be at all surprised, mark what I say, if he got Peter a better situation." "We'll only hear that, Peter," said Mrs. Cratchit. "And then," cried one of the girls, "Peter will be keeping company with someone and setting up for himself." "Oh, get along with you," replied Peter, grinning. "It's just as likely as not," said Bob. "One of these days, though there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and whenever we part from one another, I am sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that there ever was among us." "Never, Father," they all cried. "And I know," said Bob, "I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not easily quarrel amongst ourselves and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it. No, never, Father. I'm very happy, said Bob. I am very happy. Mrs. Cratchit kissed him. His daughters kissed him, and those two young Cratchits kissed them, and Peter and himself shook hands. Spirit of Tiny Tim, thy childish essence was from God. Spectre, said Scrooge. Something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what that man was whom we saw lying dead. The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a churchyard. Here, then, the wretched man whose name we had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with repleted appetite. A worthy place. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. He advanced toward it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw new meaning in its solemn shape. Before I draw near to that stone to which you point, said Scrooge, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or the shadows of things that may be only? Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which he stood. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they must lead, but if the courses be departed from, the ends must change. Say it is thus with what you show me. The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I that man who lay upon the bed? He cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and then back again. No, spirit, no, no, no. The finger was still there. Spirit, he cried, tight, clutching at his ropes. Hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. But for this intercourse, why show me this if I am past all hope? And for the first time, the hand appeared to shake. Good spirit, he pursued as he went down on the ground as he fell before it. Your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. The kind hand trembled. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all year. I will live in the past and the present and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone. Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Stave 5, the end of it. Yes! And the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all the time before him was his own to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. Scrooge trembled as he scrambled out of the bed. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. He was so flustered with the glowing of his good intentions that his broken voice would scarcely answer to his call. They are not torn down, said Scrooge, folding under the bed curtains of his arms. They are not torn down. Rings and all, they are here. I am here, and the shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will be. His hands were busy with the garments of this time, turning them inside and out, putting them on, upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, and marking them to every kind of extravagance. I don't know what to do, cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath. I am as light as a feather. I am as happy as an angel. I am as merry as a schoolboy. I am as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody and a Happy New Year to all the world. Hello, hello, whoop, hello. He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there, perfectly winded. There's the saucepan with the gruel in it, cried Scrooge. And then there's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas present, the window where I was wandering spirits. It's all right. It's all true. It all happened. Really, for a man who had been out of his practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh. The most illustrious laugh, father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. I don't know what to do. I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind. I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Oh, he checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he'd ever heard. Clash, clang, hammer, ding, dong, bell, bell, ding, dong, hammer, clash, clang. Oh, glorious, glorious. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his hand. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial day, cold, piping for the blood to dance to, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet, fresh air, merry bells. Oh, glorious. What's today? Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in his Sunday clothes who perhaps had loitered in to look about. Huh? Returned the boy. What's today, my fine fellow? Today? Why, it's Christmas Day. Ha, 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 it's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Well, they can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello? Do you know the poulters in the street but one on the corner? Well, I should hope so. Ooh, an intelligent boy. Remarkable boy. Do you know whether they have sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? No, not the little prize turkey, the big one. Not the one as big as I am. Oh, what a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. It's hanging there now, replied the boy. Is it? Go and buy it. Walker, exclaimed the boy. No, I am in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here that I may give them the directions where to take it. Now, come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Now, come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown. Well, the boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sent it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Joe Miller never made such a joke as sending it to Bob's Wilby. Now, the hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one. But write he did, somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. And as he stood there, waiting for his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. Ha! I shall love it as long as I live, cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Oh, here's the turkey. Hello, whoop, how are you? Merry Christmas. It was a turkey. He never could have stirred upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped him short off in a minute with sticks like sealing wax. Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town, said Scrooge. You must have a cab. He dressed himself in all his best, and at last got out into the street. The people were by this time pouring forth, as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present. And walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded every one with a delightful smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant in a word that 3 or 4 good-natured fellows said, "Good morning, sir. A Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said afterwards that in all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. He had not gone far when, coming on towards him, he beheld the 2 portly gentlemen who had walked into the counting-house the day before and said, "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe." It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman looked upon him when they met. But he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it. My dear sirs," said Scrooge, quickening his pace and taking the old gentleman by both hands. "How do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. Merry Christmas to you, sir." "Mr. Scrooge?" Scrooge? Yes, that is my name, and I fear it may not be a pleasant one. Allow me to ask your pardon, and will you have the goodness? And here Scrooge whispered in his ear, Lord bless me. My dear Scrooge, Mr. Scrooge, are you serious? If you please, not a farthing less. And a great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favor? My dear sir. Don't say anything, please. Come and see me. Will you come see me? I will, cried the gentleman. And it was clear he meant to do it. Thank you, Mr. Scrooge. I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you. He went to church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro, patted children on the head, questioned beggars, looked down into the kitchens of houses and up to the windows, and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But he made a dash and did it. Is your master home, my dear? Said Scrooge. Yes, sir. Where is he? He's in the dining room, sir, with the mistress. He knows me, he said with his hand already on the dining room lock. I'll go in, my dear. And he turned it gently and sidled in, round the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in a great array, for these young housekeepers were always nervous on such points, and liked to see that everything was right. Fred, well now, dear heart alive, his niece by marriage started. Scrooge had forgotten for the moment about his situation in the corner with the footstool, or he wouldn't have done it on any account. Why, bless my soul, cried Fred. Who's that? It is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Let him in? It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could have been heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party. Wonderful games. Wonderful unanimity. Wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If only he could be there first to catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon, and he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1/4 past. No Bob. Bob was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time, and Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might be able to see him come into the tank. His hat was off before he opened the door. His comforter, too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. Hello, growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day? Oh, I am very sorry, sir, said Bob. I am behind my time. You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please. It's only once a year, sir, pleaded Bob. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir. Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer, and therefore, Scrooge continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig into the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again, and therefore I am about to raise your salary. Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to the people in the court for help and a straight waistcoat. A Merry Christmas, Bob, said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken as he clapped him on the back. A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you in many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. And we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. And make up the fires And buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. And as good a man the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And, knowing that such of these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their noses and grin to have the malady of in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. Now, he had no other intercourse with the spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one.
This has been a Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival presentation of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, read by Jason King Jones, music by Cedric Lamar, and featuring the track November Replace by mobygratis. From all of us here at PSF and As You Mic It, we wish you a season of warmth, reflection, and good company. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you at La Buddha.